Today, I am at South Mountain. Now, this isn't the place where I originally intended to go, but on my way to another battlefield, I was driving up along this road here, the old National Road as they call it, today US Route 40, and stumbled upon it, South Mountain. Now, the reason why I stopped is because it actually has a lot to do with today's battle. But before I get to the Battle of South Mountain, I'd like to talk about something that happened here much earlier. In fact, over 100 years earlier. In the 1750s, this area was part of the colony of Maryland and was owned by the British Empire. Now, beyond these hills that I'm standing on, there was a river called the Ohio River, and its importance to both the British Empire and the French Empire just beyond it, north in Canada, cannot be understated, as it was the vital link in French trade routes and a very important barrier to British expansion westward. The French had set up a number of forts there, including one Fort Duquesne, which rests at the site of modern-day Pittsburgh. The British, of course, wanted to secure their borders and also expand westward, and so decided to send an army to remove the French from Fort Duquesne. That army was led by a general named Braddock, and in that army was a colonel named George Washington. And in the 1750s, as one of the opening actions of the French and Indian War, more famously known as the 7 Years' War, Washington, Braddock, and their column marched over this hill to meet whatever awaited them. At this hill it was nothing, but at a place near Pittsburgh, they were ambushed and slaughtered by French forces with Indian allies. Fast forward 100 years, another invading army has arrived in South Mountain. This time, it's the Confederate Army. They have invaded Maryland in 1862 to try and gain international support and recognition. Up until this point, all the fighting had been fought in Virginia and other southern states. On the heels of their recent victories at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, no, never mind, hold on, I got that wrong. It's even more fantastic than those victories. Right after their victories at 7 Days, 7 Pines, and Second Manassas, as well as Jackson's Valley campaign, the Confederates have decided to take the initiative and invade the North. Now, the Union Army, of course, wants to stop them. And luckily for them, they find a copy of Lee's entire battle plan. McClellan knows exactly where the Confederates are going to be and when. When Lee finds out about this, he realizes just how bad his situation really is. Lee has split his army up into 3 groups. One, on the western side of these, or on the eastern side of these mountains, is in the Frederick County area, and they're trying to put a threat on Washington, D.C. Another is to the west of these mountains, up near Mechanicsburg. They're marching around, foraging for supplies and other such things, trying to win the hearts and minds of the people, because Maryland was a divided state. They were both sympathizers for the Confederates and the Union armies, so the Confederates were really on a PR campaign at this point. And so far it was going pretty well. Lincoln in 1860 had to imprison the entire Maryland state legislature so that they wouldn't secede. That's a constitutional crisis in its own right, but yeah, that just tells you how divided Maryland really was. Now, another group to my south, facing this way, was led by Stonewall Jackson, and it was besieging Harper's Ferry. All three of these groups could be cut off and defeated in detail if McClellan, the Union commander, used his forces correctly. And McClellan, although slow to catch on to what was going on, did decide to take this course of action. So the Confederate Army that was in Frederick County marched rapidly westward towards these mountains. The Confederate force in Mechanicsburg marched the same direction, or marched the other direction to get here. The point was to get to this mountain and set up a defensive position so that they could buy time for Jackson's forces besieging Harper's Ferry to come and reunite the army once again so that they could fight the Union on an equal footing. Of course, Jackson took a little bit longer than they anticipated, and the Union were a little bit quicker than they had also anticipated. So, on September, in the third week of September, Confederate forces engaged Union forces in a delaying action on South Mountain. The battle was fierce and short, and only lasted a few hours, but the Confederates managed to stall the Union advance. The Confederates managed to escape with most of their force intact over the mountain, down the road, and towards a place called Sharpsburg, Maryland, where Lee would make his final stand in an attempt to try and get Jackson's reinforcements that he badly needed. The defensive line that he'd set up would be along the Antietam Creek. Hence, it would give the battle the name of Antietam. Or, if you're a Southerner, they named it after the town that was right next to it, Sharpsburg. So in today's episode of Carpe Historiam on the Road, it's time for the Battle of Antietam, or the Battle of Sharpsburg, whichever one you want to say. But, yeah, let's go. Right in front of you is the Pry House. On September 16th, 1862, this was General McClellan's headquarters. It was also on that day that General McClellan decided on a plan of action for the upcoming Battle of Antietam. He met with his generals in the house and discussed what they should do. The battlefield was divided in two by the Antietam Creek. The Confederates had used both the creek and the hills on either side as a defensive barrier. They had set up a very strong defensive position. Anchored on both flanks by the Potomac River, the Confederates could not be outflanked. They had to be attacked head-on through rough terrain. Today, this museum is part of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. It's their field hospital place. But it was in there that McClellan decided to make a three-pronged attack. He would use General Hooker's corps to attack from the north. They would cross the Antietam in the area just right in front of you, actually, swing around and try and come down on top of Lee's army. The next prong, which would be attacking at the same time, would attack right up the middle. The road behind me, or in front of the camera now, is the main road into Sharpsburg. It crossed a bridge over the Antietam Creek called Middle Bridge, and General Sumner's corps would cross there and attack Sharpsburg dead on. So we've got Hooker, Sumner, and then in the very south, which you can't see, General Burnside will launch the third prong. He will attack across Lower Bridge. Hooker is going across Upper Bridge, Sumner Middle Bridge, and Burnside Lower Bridge. Because of the nature of the attack, the three prongs don't actually end up attacking at the same time, which makes the Battle of Antietam very easy to follow. Because the first attack to start, the first group to start the battle will be Hooker's men in the north, the second Sumner's men in the middle, and the third Burnside's men in the south. So it makes the battlefield very easy to understand. As you move from north to south, you go from earlier in the day to later in the day. And this is the spot where I'm standing, where they looked out and said, yep, you cross there, and you go over there. So yeah, really interesting museum inside. Abraham Lincoln actually stopped here on his tour of the battlefield. So, you know, if you're into Abraham Lincoln and you're a Lincoln buff, then go ahead and stop here, because this is a place where he stopped. So yeah, on to the actual battlefield itself. Just for reference, here's the Pry House, and off in the distance, you can barely see it, but right there, in that little valley there in between the two hills, is South Mountain. So we haven't actually gone that far. You're within visual distance. So people like General Lee, who was over in this area during the day of the Battle of South Mountain, could actually hear the gunfire and cannon fire coming from the battle. So it just gives you a sense of how close together everything really is. Because Sharpsburg's just over in this direction a mile, South Mountain's over in that direction a few miles. So yeah, there you go. Just Civil War battles were not huge things. The whole battlefield and campaign takes up a very small area, just because of the nature of marching armies. In modern times, if this was a World War II battlefield, I'd be within range of artillery stationed on that mountain. But because of the Civil War technology, there's no such range to speak of. So yeah, there you go. September 17th, 1862. General Hooker is the first to start his attack. And the fields in front of us, in fact, far off in the distance, I'll get a closer look later, but the field over in front of us is what is called Miller's Cornfield. And this is where the fighting begins on September 17th. Hooker's men, coming from the far side of the field, are advancing through the corn, which is 7-8 feet tall, so well over people's heads, towards what they knew were going to be Confederate positions. The Confederates had set up a defensive line along the opposite end of the cornfield, behind a little shallow dip in the land that provided almost kind of makeshift cover, natural cover. When they could hear the Union troops rustling in the corn with their canteens and other metal parts clanging together, they stood up, aimed into the corn, and fired a volley right as they could see the flag coming towards them through the top of the corn. The fighting in the cornfield, like the fighting in the wheat field, which I talked about in my last Carpe Historiam on the road video, was very brutal, back and forth. For a couple hours, Confederate troops and Union troops fought for control of the cornfield. By the end of the fighting, all of the corn was trampled. Some cut in half by bullets, others just trampled by the men charging through. Hood's Texas Brigade, during a counterattack, actually managed to lose 80% of their strength in one assault. This section of the line was commanded by General Stonewall Jackson for the Confederates. He had come back with about half of his force from Harper's Ferry. The other half, commanded by A.P. Hill, was on its way back and due to arrive that afternoon. The whole Confederate plan of action was to hold on until A.P. Hill could arrive with his reinforcements. Then they could strengthen the line wherever need be and hold off the Union attack. So it really was a race against time for the Union to beat the Confederate force before A.P. Hill could come to the rescue. Eventually, the Union actually managed to break through the cornfield and these woods off to the left of here, the West Woods. Or actually, the North Woods. And they would advance as far as this Dunker Church, which is right in front of you. Fighting around where I'm standing was very intense. Confederate and Union troops would be attacking across this road and up here and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Cannons would be captured multiple times and pointed in different directions. Thousands of bodies strewn over, this whole field here. But at the key moment when the Union troops were advancing on Dunker Church and about to win, General Hooker is shot in the foot. Now, pretty mundane wound, but it's still a wound, and he had to be removed from the battlefield for fear of blood loss. So right at the critical moment, the Union suffers a fatal loss of command structure. Hooker was the only man in that Union force with a vision of the overall plan. He had been with McClellan at the planning meeting, and he had helped McClellan come up with the plan. So losing the brain power, the command, the leadership, all of it's gone now. And so the Union just fight a holding action and eventually a fighting retreat back across the cornfield. So that's the morning summarized from about 5 to 9 a.m. And of course it was September, so all the trees had leaves. So it didn't look exactly like this. Not a mid-November day. But yeah. That's the first few hours of fighting summarized. How fortunate. I've managed to find some corn stalks. Right now, I am holding the camera at eye level. I'm about 5'9" high, and that's right about where the camera is positioned right now. I'm about average height for a Civil War soldier, so I'm actually kind of a good representation. Though, of course, because of genetic engineering, corn plants were actually much taller back then. And now, you can see actually there is some corn on these corn plants that wasn't harvested. Alright, well, here's a cornfield for you. I'm not going to walk through it since it looks like there's still corn on the cob actually, so I won't ruin these farmers' crops, but you can just get a sense of, basically you're blind walking through these things. So you can kind of feel for the Union soldiers walking through here, not knowing where you are, just trying to keep the formation. And the Confederate soldiers just hearing the rustle and the corn with the little wind, you can kind of hear it here. Just the rustle. And then eventually you hear the clang of canteens and cups and other assorted items on the Union soldiers. Then you see the flag on over top of the corn, and you stand up and fire. Of course, this isn't actually the spot where that part happened, but this is a cornfield, so it's right next to it. Over there is the cornfield. But I'm standing at a much more significant spot, and a spot that many of you will recognize from a famous photograph of the battle. A couple days after the battlefield, a photographer named Matthew Brady came here to take pictures of the aftermath. And, well, I'm standing alongside the Hagerstown Turnpike. And, well, the photo is called Aftermath Along the Hagerstown Turnpike, and they've got a little sign here. You'll recognize the photograph, but I'm not going to show the photograph right now. Here's the angle. Okay? Right about there. That's the angle of the photograph. Let's take a look at the photograph. You'll probably recognize it. Yeah, no, battle's a pretty ugly thing. And I can't imagine being Matthew Brady coming to take pictures of that. Just the dead bodies strewn along the fence. Yeah, no, given the opportunity, I would not want to be here during the time of the battle. Because it was, after all, the bloodiest day in the Civil War. Bloodiest single day, I should say. There are so many men who are killed or wounded here that one man was dying every second for 16 hours. It's crazy. This battle was ugly. It was intense. I can't I can't overstate that. Just look. And these are the guys who were left behind to rot. Not even the people who were buried. Now, war is an ugly thing. And we should not repeat it. So yeah. There's the corn and one of the most famous photos of the Civil War. All in one spot. So, over there's the spot where Matthew Brady took his famous photograph, and where the corn still stands today. There's the visitor center. There's some of the battlefield. And here's Miller's cornfield. And he was right behind that split rail fence that Confederate forces first engaged Union troops on September 17, 1862. Union troops advanced through the tall corn, across the field, to the split rail fence, and you can kind of see where I'm standing. There's a right behind it. There's a little dip in the ground, right here, and also on the other side. You can kind of see it, where the Confederates would have been hidden from the Union forces until they got to the fence. Which is why when they got to the fence, or right before it, they stood up and fired a volley point blank into the Union troops. Just to get a sense for it, if I step over on the other side of the fence, I'm standing where the Confederates would have been, and right in front of me is right where the Union troops would have been when they shot. Not more than 40 feet. So, again, point blank, very deadly. So yeah, and it looks like that was a cornfield just a few days ago. So that's probably going to be harvested soon. This was harvested a little bit earlier. Well, so there you have it. Miller's cornfield. I already kind of explained what happened. Again, just a back and forth. And then once they broke through, they went all the way to where the visitor center stands. And the Dunker Church is right next to the visitor center. You can't see it, it's just obscured by the trees. But yeah, Miller's cornfield. The next attack would come from General Sumner's men in the middle. Again, visitor center, very centrally located, so I'm still here. And I'm talking about half the day's battle already. Sumner's men come from that direction. Right in middle frame, where you see kind of two divots in the mountains, is where South Mountain is. And that's the road his men advanced up to get right about in those fields where my camera's pointing. The Confederate line stretched from where I'm standing, past the visitor center, and down this hill towards a road, which you can very faintly see right past those cannons, the picket fence. Split rail fence. The Confederate line extended down that split rail fence into a road, or a lane, that was an old farming road. And it had been well trodden for hundreds of years, and it had been so well used that it had sunk into the ground, almost like a trench, and so they called it the Sunken Road. Though today, in the battle, it would gain a new name, Bloody Lane, because of all the people who would die there. But for now, the Confederates in Bloody Lane were not thinking about that, because they were slaughtering Union forces as they advanced across these fields. Because of the divots in the ground, as you can see, it kind of goes up and down and up and down and up and down. The Union forces were only exposed for brief moments as they advanced towards the line. But when they got right towards the last hill, the Confederates were not more than maybe 50 yards away, and at some points even just 100 feet. So when that last hill was crested by Union troops, the Confederates would unleash volley after volley into them. The Confederates developed a tactic here that they would use it very effectively at Fredericksburg later, where the front line of troops would use the guns and fire them. They would be selected because of their marksmanship to be in the front line. The rest of the men would reload the guns and give them to the men in the front so that they could keep up a continuous volume of fire. It's a more efficient actually version of the fire by rank tactic developed by British and other European armies during the 1700s. And I say more efficient because the volume of fire was greater, because instead of each man loading his own rifle, you had one guy firing 4 guys' rifles so that he could just pick up a gun, shoot it, and there would already be a gun reloaded behind him, and he could just keep doing it. So yeah, very deadly. Let's go down to the Bloody Lane to talk about what happened next. This is one of the parts of the battle that maps will not help you imagine. If you look around, there are a whole bunch of little hills and gullies and all sorts of stuff. Right there is the Bloody Lane where the picket rail fence is. And you can now kind of see, looks like there's some reenactment going on. But you can now kind of see, yeah, there's definitely reenactment going on. You can now kind of see how the Union troops would have managed to sneak up so close. Wow, that's muskets. Huh. So if you heard that, that's rifled musket fire. I don't know who's doing that, but I guess I came at a fortunate time. So you can hear just how loud it would have been, because that was coming from half a mile away. Yeah, no, they're pretty loud. You can hear it for a long time. So you can see how the Union troops would have been able to sneak up so close. I'm standing at the crest of a ridge right now, facing the Bloody Lane. I just start walking this way a little bit, and I turn around. You can see the Bloody Lane kind of starting to disappear behind the hill. I mean, of course, you can still be seen over there, but those guys are focusing on the troops in front of them. Now, if you look back there, you can barely see it. In fact, if I step back just a little bit further, I can't see the thing. I can see it over there, and I can barely see it over there. But these guys don't have an angle on me. And I just took like 10 paces. So you can kind of see how the Union troops would have gotten up this close. And then as I keep walking, you can start to see it come back into frame. And even then the Confederates aren't going to have a great shot at me. They can only see my top half right now. Now as I start getting close to this sign, this little post, now they really got the angle on me. But when I get here, just takes a quick dash. I could be there in 20 seconds. I'm not going to try it because I'm not very fast and not very eager to take a run. But if I was a Union soldier, I could run it. I mean, I would run it because that's my best shot at not getting shot. Battle of the Bloody Lane is essentially Union troops advance up where I'm standing and start taking volleys. Both taking and giving volleys, I should say. They stop here and start shooting because they have an angle at the Confederate troops. The Confederate troops, with their newfangled reloading system and with just a very good defensive position, are able to just tear the Union ranks down, and the Union troops can't do much to them. This goes on for 2 or 3 hours, just as the fighting's dying down over by Miller's cornfield over there. And By the time it's over, where I'm standing, hundreds of bodies are just littering the field. Now, Union troops of the Irish Brigade and of a new division are advancing up here. And instead of going straight up, part of the Irish Brigade, in fact I think the whole of the Irish Brigade, does a flanking move out around that way. Shows you just how visionary the Union commanders were up to this point. They managed to flank around the side to a few yards, to like maybe 50, 100 feet past that, where that tower is. And when they got there, they had an angle down the entirety of the road up to about here. They could just shoot everyone. And so they did. The Confederates, realizing they were flanked, started to retreat, but it was too late. Volley after volley was pouring into them, and the Union troops that were standing here saw the Confederates retreating and took the opportunity to run towards where the Confederates were standing. By the time the Confederates were ready to move out, Union troops were already up towards where the fence was and firing point blank into the ditch. Hundreds of bodies started to pile up. One Confederate colonel, who was in charge of a regiment here, actually was buried alive under the bodies with his face down in his hat. Now, all the blood from the guys above him and his own blood was pooling in the hat. But thanks to his hat having been shot earlier in the day and there being a hole in it, he was able to not drown in his own blood because the blood was able to drain out of the hat and into the ditch. That's why they call it Bloody Lane. Not that story in particular, but thousands like it. When Union troops were able to make it to where I'm standing and decided to advance across the Bloody Lane to take the artillery positions that the Confederates had set up there and there, they could not walk this part that I'm walking without stepping on Confederate bodies. That's how many people died or were wounded here. Now, of course, on the opposite side, I couldn't have walked 20 feet that way without stepping on Union bodies beyond the fence. So, really bloody part of the battle here. So yeah, that's pretty much the Bloody Lane summarized, because after the Union took the Bloody Lane, they weren't able to take up the advantage that they had gotten. And the Confederates were able to reform positions behind it on the hills beyond. So yeah, that's the Bloody Lane. Now it's time for one of the more famous parts of the battle, actually. Burnside's attack on the lower bridge, which would soon, by the end of the day, bear his name. Burnside's Bridge. Quick point of interest. Both future presidents, William McKinley and Rutherford B. Hayes, fought at the Battle of Antietam. This memorial happens to be a memorial to William McKinley. Apparently he fought near here, near Burnside's Bridge. So they have a memorial for him. He would later be assassinated by, I don't know who, but he would later be assassinated and replaced by famous President Teddy Roosevelt. So that gives you some historical perspective. It's kind of interesting, the lives of presidents before and after their time in office. Kind of gives you a sense of historical imagination, as one of my teachers likes to say. I'm standing nearby Burnside's Bridge right now. And the bridge, you can almost see it, is right down there. Up on this ridge, words are hard today. Up on this ridge, Confederate troops would have been stationed. Only a few hundred of them between the whole of the bridge defense. About 200 of them in entrenchments up on this ridge. I'll revisit that location in a little bit. Right now, I'm walking up a path to a place called the Georgians Overlook. And it was at the Georgians Overlook where some men from Georgia, hence the name, were stationed and they were some of the best marksmen in the Confederate Army. So they were put on this position up above Antietam Creek to provide overwatch on the bridge and get flanking fire on Union forces trying to attack it. Now, if I turn and look through the woods, because it's winter, you can see Burnside's bridge. But if it was September, when the battle happened, you couldn't see through here. I gotta keep walking. But you can just see based on that angle, we are at an elevated position overlooking Burnside's bridge from the flank. This is a really good spot to be. Forget it. We're walking away from the bridge, so I'm just gonna go through some of the woods here. Go overland. You can already tell just how annoying it would have been to get through all these raspberries and briars and stuff. Even in winter, it's annoying. In the summer, or towards the end of summer, it would have been really unpleasant. So you can see below us the Antietam Creek. I'm just getting stuck in these brambles, don't mind me. And now the Antietam Creek is actually pretty shallow. If you know how to swim, you're fine. In fact, even if you don't know how to swim, you'd probably be fine. It's just that armies in the 1800s were not very nimble things. In order to get an army across a river, you needed to have either a very shallow spot, almost where rocks and stuff are breaking the surface of the water, or you need to have a bridge. This spot, Burnside's Bridge, is the latter of the two. Antietam Creek's only about 3 feet deep. About kiddie pool deep. But, because it's flowing water, and you're weighed down with all sorts of equipment, if you don't know how to swim, and you fall down, you trip on a rock or something, you're screwed. Because you're going to be face down, backpack facing up. You're just going to be pressed down into the rocks by the guys coming behind you. Not a good situation. You're going to drown. Or, at best, you're going to be flapping around like a fish in the water. It's not going to be fun. So Union forces, therefore, with their artillery and such, were forced to cross Burnside's Bridge. Now, Burnside took a very long time to get his forces ready. So it was only towards the end of the day that he'd actually get his command ready for the battle. And it was already in the afternoon by the time that his men started from those woods over there, advancing to the bridge. Now, because there's woods in front of me, obscuring the view of the bridge, I'm going to go down this hill, but I'm not going to film that. Because it would be hard with no hands to descend a steep hill like that. So I'll meet you down at the bottom to give you a better view of the bridge and the battle. So here we are at the bottom. That was one of the that was one of the more interesting things I've done in the past few weeks, climbing that or descending that hill. Of course, the Confederates would have had to during the battle, so give it you a little bit of experience. So here's Antietam Creek. If I take a look down there, you can see just how shallow it is. You can see right through it. And because of reflections, you can't really see much out beyond, but it's about a foot and a half deep all the way across. It's just wide. Still enough to drown in, but not a lot. So I'm going to start walking towards Burnside Bridge and talk a little bit more. So when Burnside finally gets his act together, mid-afternoon, his artillery is set up on the ridge opposite the one that I just descended, over there. They're shelling the Confederates. Only about 500 of them in total. And they're all dug into the teeth, either up here or over there. You can see how dominating that position is. If you look over there, it's a hill. Over there, it's just an open field. So Union troops would have had to advance down the hill, through the woods, and across that open field just to get to the bridge. Then across the bridge, up the hill, and, well, defeating the Confederates in melee to actually break through. So you can pretty easily see that, well, not exactly an optimal position for the Union forces here, which is why Lee chose this to anchor his line. You could just leave 500 guys here with some guns and some ammo, and all of a sudden you've got a nearly impenetrable position. I'm not going to try that. We'll just keep advancing along the side here. So here we are, Burnside's Bridge. It's one of the better views you're going to get of the whole thing. It's a 3-arch bridge, about 12 feet wide. Not too big, but big enough to get a cannon across, which is what matters. Cannons, wagons, etc. The lifeline of an army, logistics. You can get it across here. Sorry about the weird camera angles. I'm trying to hold a camera while navigating this, so please forgive me. But this is a view of the bridge that you won't get if you follow the regular paths. So we're gonna head up this little deer trail here to the bridge. We're gonna cross it over to the Union side. Burnside's regiments, again, having advanced all the way down and across the open field under heavy Confederate artillery and musket fire, are forced to take cover once they actually reach the open field there. If you look towards the bridge, on the right side there's a picket fence. On the left side, this is from the Confederate point of view, there's a stone wall. Most of the Union troops took cover behind the stone wall, as it provided optimal cover. Now, as we walk across the bridge, you can see just how much of a choke point it is. Union troops thousands of them would have had to swim across this little thing, and Confederates entrenched up there. Oh my goodness, what a beautiful target for them. So, walking across the bridge, again, take a look at how shallow it is. Might be able to see it better this time, but even in the middle of the river, some parts even less than a foot deep. All you're basically doing is getting your feet wet. But wagons can't cross that, so that's why they need the bridge. And Union troops didn't want to risk the swim, just in case they fell over. Because, again, at this time, most of these guys were from places like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. Not exactly used to swimming. In fact, swimming is only a skill that really has been widely adopted in recent decades. The 20th century really is where swimming became an important part of life for vacations and such. So now across the bridge. For a couple hours now, Union troops have been advancing to this position up against this stone wall and taking cover. Hundreds of troops are taking cover here, pinned down by Confederate snipers on the hill, and unable to really do anything. All they can really do is look down the wall, peek up over the side, get shot at, bullets hitting the wall, ping, and then taking cover again. Now, down the hill and across the open field come 2 regiments that Burnside personally picked for this attack to try and finish the job. The 52nd Pennsylvania, or the 51st Pennsylvania and the 51st New York. Pennsylvania and New York were 2 of the largest Union states in terms of population. And in fact, I'd estimate about half the Union Army was made up totally of Pennsylvania and New York men. You can see the monument to the 51st Pennsylvania here. The monument to the 51st New York is somewhere down here. They got up here, and they, after taking heavy losses on the crossing to get here, take cover behind the wall, just like everyone else. Except that something changed with these 2 regiments. Their flag bearer, obviously without the fear of God in him, got up and started running across the bridge. Now, it's part of a soldier's duty to protect the flag, so everybody got up and started running across the bridge. And sure enough, in about 20 minutes, they were at the top of that ridge. It just took one man's bravery to get across. That's how much influence one man can have on a unit, especially a man with a flag. Which is why people would target flag officers and flag bearers specifically. Because they have that kind of morale effect on men. So yeah. We'll move on now to what happened after Burnside took the bridge. Just another quick thing before I get on to the end. This is the view that the Confederates would have had up on top of that big hill that I was showing you earlier. The Union troops crossing the bridge were sitting ducks. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Over there again, it's the hill. The Union would have had to come down, across the open field, across there, and up the hill, all the way up to where I'm standing. All probably within range of Confederate musket fire. Except for the hill part, open field onwards, Confederates were shooting at you. Good luck getting through that. I'm going to stay here because there ain't much where the last part of the battle happened. But after crossing the bridge, Union forces had broken the Confederate line. There were no more reinforcements left. The only hope was for A.P. Hill to arrive and save the day. And he had to march all the way from Harper's Ferry to here in a day. Usually it takes a day and a half, but A.P. Hill's men were better known as the Light Division. They moved so fast that they were deemed like cavalry almost, which is why they were named the Light Division. They were basically light infantry. So by the time at the end of the day, when Burnside's men break across the bridge, A.P. Hill's men show up, as if out of nowhere, and halt the Union advance. Just imagine if all 3 Union attacks had happened at once. If by noon, Burnside had broken across the bridge, and Sumner was attacking like he was in actuality, the Bloody Lane, and if Hooker had not been shot and was still attacking in the cornfield, all 3 might have broken through at once and absolutely demolished the Confederate Army. But instead, what happened is they attacked piecemeal, and due to lack of initiative, lack of command, or just lack of overall vision for the battle plan, they came in, and the Confederates were able to defeat each push in detail. Now, even if the attacks in the cornfield and at Bloody Lane in the middle had both failed, and Burnside had attacked at the same time and still won, the battle might still have been Union victory. But instead, by the end of the day, the Union had pushed maybe a mile or two that way over the hill and just been stopped by AP Hill, making the battle essentially a draw. There really can be no victor in a battle where the Confederates have still held on to their positions and are still there at the end of the day, and the Union have not really made any real progress or any significant gains. So the Battle of Antietam will go down tactically as one of the bloodiest draws in history. No winners, no losers. But strategically, Antietam is very significant because the Confederates, specifically Robert E. Lee, knew that if an attack came the next day, they were kaput. They couldn't hold on. The entirety of the Union force was there, and the only reason they had lucked out, well, the only reason they had won or held their ground on the 17th was due to sheer luck at the Union attack not going as planned. So Lee decides to pull back across the Potomac River into Virginia, and as a consequence gives up all hope of foreign recognition and all hope of making Maryland side with the Confederates. The PR campaign failed because the Confederates, in essence, lost the battle. Even though they held their ground, they had to leave. And so this will go down, the Battle of Antietam, as one of the first Union significant victories in the war. Even though it isn't really a Union victory, strategically it was. And Lincoln had been looking for just such a victory, because he had a proclamation to make, and he wanted to do it with full authority and the backing of the Union Army behind him on the tail of a victory. And that proclamation was the Emancipation Proclamation, which was an executive order which essentially freed all the slaves in the southern states. The reason he was able to do this was because constitutionally he could take them as contraband of war and move them north. So it's kind of ironic, right? Because contraband of war, that's property. So he's freeing the slaves by, in the executive order, recognizing their status as property. But when you're trying to free the slaves, you're trying to look for any loophole that you can in the law. So even if there's an apparent conflict of interest in it, Lincoln was able to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, and on the heel of a victory, it actually had some kind of weight to it. And it was at this point that the war became really, really bloody. Before the Battle of Antietam, the war had been really bad. But it was about to go from bad to worse. Because now, even though the war had started about slavery, most of the troops involved weren't thinking free the slaves when they were fighting. But now that Lincoln had stated blatantly his war goal and affirmed the reality that was that the Union and Confederate struggle was about slavery, the Confederates were going to up their game. They were going to fight to the last man, and so were the Union. And so in the upcoming battles, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, and then the Overland Campaign in 1864 and 1865, the bloodiest years of the war were to come. So that's the legacy of the Battle of Antietam. Freeing the slaves through an executive order, and Confederate recognition from Europe, and the PR campaign in Maryland and other border states to try and end the war, by demoralizing the Union public, he was kaput. Now the Confederates were in a bitter fight to the end, trying to drag the Union down with them into the abyss of bloody conflict. So yeah, that's the Battle of Antietam. Hopefully in the weeks coming, we'll go to Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and other battlefields later on in the war, as well as other places like Manassas and Revolutionary War battlefields like Yorktown. This Carpe Historiam on the Road series is only going to keep getting better, because nearby where I live, there's a lot of stuff to do. So hopefully you learned something, and well, if nothing else, you heard 3 musket shots at Bloody Lane, so there you go. Also, one quick last note. This tree that I'm standing next to, this one, it's an oak tree. It's about 200 years old, maybe 230 years old. This tree was around at the time of the battle. It was much tinier back then. In fact, you can see it in the picture. There's the bridge and there's the tree. Right there, that's the tree. We are still within, and now this is a stretch, we are still within living memory of these battles. 100 years from now, this tree is probably going to be gone. The last remnant, last organic carbon life form relic from the battle. So yeah, that's the Battle of Antietam, folks. Hope you had a great day, and I hope it continues to get better. Anyways, good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. See you all later.